as a lot of you will know, it's just very tough to penetrate the US market. Just because it might be of relevance, I can share one experience that we did. We helped a company called the Ear Logic, and we invested in this company very early. And what they had was a hearing improvement therapy technology, and so we were trying to help them break into the US market. We actually managed to partner with Stanford Medical School and the Palo Alto Medical Foundation to do a clinical trial with about 100 subjects, and the study was successful. We were able to prove through the clinical study in partnership with Stanford that the hearing improvement technology actually worked, and a paper was published thereafter. But in spite of that, just because of other factors, the startup quite didn't make it. So I know how hard it is. It's hard enough to start a startup, whether it's in Korea or in the US/Silicon Valley. But it's even harder when you start a startup, say in Korea, and try to cross the border and come to the US and make it a global success. So you're trying to go up two challenges, not just entrepreneurship, but global entrepreneurship. So, I don't have the answers, just like many of you, if not all of you. I have a lot of experience attempting. So if, I don't want this to be like an authoritative talk where I tell you this is the way you should do it, because I still don't know. But through observation of a lot of successful entrepreneurs around us, and just seeing a lot of success case studies, maybe I can share some tips of what I've seen that might work. And hopefully, all of us can gain some insight into how to succeed globally.
Great.
Thank you. And over to you, Nathan and Peter.
Great. Thanks, John, for the introduction. Thanks for being honest and candid as well. I think that's really important in these kind of sessions and these programs generally. The discussion last week with Jay was also similarly very honest and candid. So that's great. And just to give a bit of background, I've known John since 2012, so good long time. John was a massive support when I was working at Be Success. What I can remember most was his incredible ability to get high-level speakers into our events, both in Korea and Silicon Valley. So John, I think, was very modest in his introduction, but has got a lot of drive in helping Korean entrepreneurs, has been involved deeply in Korea for a long time, even though he's based in LA, and has worked, I'm sure, with hundreds of Korean companies over the years, helping them break out of the Korean market. So I'm sure that it'll be a useful discussion. And again, we're recording this session, so we'll send it through to everyone afterwards. And just a quick note on our program, Dean sent an email through yesterday with a few wrap-up things. So if you could have a look into that and hopefully book a time with me early next week, that'd be fantastic. Great. So this first question on the list is one that we also covered last week. Now, I think it's good to get different perspectives, or even have opinions on this confirmed by multiple people. But the first question, John, is how can startups decide when is the right time to consider international expansion? And obviously, international expansion means different things for different people. I guess, kind of what we're focused on for this program is both investment, but also market expansion. So things like doing clinical trials or looking for corporate partners or customers overseas. how can startups decide when is the right time to start really thinking about overseas?
Well, I think the answer to this is very tailored to each startup situation. So I don't think there's a right answer that fits to every startup situation. But what I do want to generally say is that one thing I would try to avoid is trying to pursue two markets at the same time early on in the startup's life cycle. Because when you're starting as a startup, it's a small team. You have very limited resources, both in terms of money, time, and team members. And even if you were to focus all the money, time, and resources into one market, it's not enough. You have to give it your 100% and beyond. So when you're an early stage startup trying to then pursue it, let's just for argument's sake and easy referencing point, say you're trying to pursue the Korean market and the US market at the same time. I think that's very challenging when you're early stage. Later on, when you a Series B, Series C, you've raised tens, 20s, 30, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars. That's doable because by then you are like 100+ member team, and you can pursue more than one market. But again, early stage, I think you should focus on one market initially. So then with that assumption, then option A is to first, so if you're in Korea, the natural thing would be to just target the Korean market and dominate that market first before you even dare cross the border and go to Southeast Asia, Japan, or the US. So that's kind of the corollary or the extension of that argument, right? But then on the other hand, if you feel that the Korean market is too small and not worth tackling, then I would say don't even try the Korean market and just go all in to the US market or whichever other market you are targeting. But I think the attitude that one should have is that you have to be all into that one market that you want to go into, at least in the early stage, sort of seed stage, and even maybe Series A. I think there's a follow-up question, so I'll reserve my comments for the next question. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, for sure. So one quick follow-up question I was going to ask, but you kind of did ask it. Early stage means different things to different people. I feel that for international expansion, anything pretty much below Series B is early stage. So, raising $1 million Series A or 2 million is probably not enough resources to focus on two markets. Yeah. Okay.
Agreed. And yeah, I mean, this again is very general advice, and every startup situation is different. So it doesn't fit every startup situation, but from general observation, that's kind of the recommendation I would give.
Mm-hmm. And John, for the question list as well, feel free to just go ahead and speak freely. We don't need to necessarily address every single question, and some will be merged. So, yeah, but a follow-up question would be, obviously you've worked with a lot of companies from Korea. Some have, I'm sure, failed in their international expansion, whereas others have succeeded. For those that haven't succeeded, what would you say? Now, again, every startup's going to be different, but are there any kind of common mistakes that companies make, or common things that these startups should be aware of to avoid those mistakes?
Sure. Just to clarify the question, is the question that they failed or not succeeded as a business or in their global expansion?
Global expansion. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So let's assume that we go with the argument that initially pre-Series B, you have to focus on the local market, or if you're going straight to the US market, you're going straight to the foreign market. But let's assume that you've gotten the additional funding to be able to now tackle a separate market. Then I think, because there's many companies that, have gotten a serious level of funding, and then they try to break into Silicon Valley. They open their offices in Silicon Valley. Typically, a lot of them open their first shop at the Kotra office on North First Street, which I think, Nathan, you've visited. Mm-hmm. And it's it's like a startup cemetery there. They attempt for 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years. They try, and then they just don't go anywhere. So in general, I think it's because they come with a Korean mentality and Korean way of doing business, and try to apply that mentality and MO, modus operandi or way of doing business into a US environment. And that just doesn't work. In a way, when you're trying to break into the US market, you have to almost regut your product and almost make it from the ground up, with the foundational components there, but still, all the skin and part of the skeletons have to be localized to adapt to the US market. So that's one. And then two, again, is because they send their HQ staff from Korea into a foreign market, and a lot of these so let's call them expat. So the Pagyeon, the people that are sent from this Korean HQ companies, they don't even speak the language fluently, and then they're expected to pitch to partners, customers, and investors, and it just doesn't fly and work. So that's, I think, another factor. So I would recommend that if you're ready to expand into the US market, at the very least, what you need is senior team members that are bilingual, bicultural. And I say bilingual, bicultural because you have to be good at communicating with HQ too. And you have to be bicultural because you have to understand the nuances from the Korean market and the Korean business culture, and also understand the nuances of the local US market, for example, and be able to, those bilingual, bicultural people have to be great agents at helping translate and intermediate between the two cultures. And so I think a lot of companies fail in hiring that kind of bridge person. And I really recommend to startups and companies that are trying to break into the US market to use all this Korean American talent that's amazing. We have so many Korean Americans here in the US who've gone to top universities, and a lot of them are most of them are fluent in Korean as well. Maybe not as fluent as somebody who lived and grew up in Korea, but I think Korean American talent is an untapped resource that startups in Korea are underutilizing. So I'll leave it at that.
Cool. Just to add one quick thing that I've seen, the ability to speak English doesn't necessarily make someone the right person to lead your international marketing as well. It's something I've seen quite a lot. We were working with a company just very recently, and the person who was hired to lead their international business development had never lived outside Korea, had no marketing or business development experience in Korea or internationally. And they were hired for the job because they spoke reasonably good English. And it was, if it was a one-off, then fair enough, but it's not a one-off. So, yeah.
No, agree totally. It's not just so hiring an interpreter will not do it. It yeah, it has to be somebody who understands the business, who's a business fit to the company. Maybe has some business background in the same industry, but on top of that has that bilingual skills, bilingual by and yeah, again, it's not about just being bilingual. The bicultural factor is also very important, and let's call it tricultural, because you need to have let's say the Korean, and then the English for the Americas, or the UK, or whichever English speaking country, and three, you need the business culture understanding as well, right? And in the startup's case, even the technology, you need to have at least a high level understanding of what the startup's working on. It's not enough just to have a fluent interpreter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the next question is intended to be a fairly practical question. So let's assume that the company has either killed it in the Korean market and is looking to the US or anywhere else to expand, or has decided that the US is the best market for them. Are there any kind of practical things that they should do or prepare for before they reach out to partners or investors in a new market? And perhaps this is kind of a metric-driven question as well. So are there signals that companies can look out for that would demonstrate that it is the right time?
Sorry. Yeah.
So
I would say, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, so this could be things like obviously revenue and profit. It could be kind of organic interest. It could be, maturity of the team. So kind of practical things that companies can actually look for like this.
Well, to be honest, once you, again, let's start from the framework that we don't recommend startups to go global unless they've reached a certain maturity in the local market, if that's the route they want to go. Let me go briefly to the other case where you just decide to bypass the Korean market.
Yeah.
Let me go there initially. Let's work off that model so we can move on from that. So in the model where we decide the Korean market is not big enough, exciting enough, whatever enough, and we want to go straight to the US market, and we're using the US market as a placeholder. It could be the Southeast Asian market, it could be the European market, and so on. Let's assume that you decide Korea is not big enough. You have to go to the US market. In that case, then you have to go at it with total abandon. And successful cases of this scenario are people like Seju, Seju from Noom.
Yeah.
He just abandoned everything in Korea, packed his bag, moved to New York, and started the company from scratch there, and gave it all in. And his English wasn't that good, so what did he do? He hired personal tutors to spend hours every week to talk and for him to improve his English, so that to this day, I mean, if you talk to Seju today, you feel like he grew up in the US, right? His English has become so good. Another example is Chang Kim from Tapas. He sold his company to Google, then moved to Silicon Valley, was working at Google, and then, didn't come back to Korea and started a startup just in the US to target the US market. Another great example is John Kim from Sandbird. He decided, okay, forget Korea. I'm gonna grow this business from Silicon Valley, and Sandbird has become a global phenomenon, but centered around Silicon Valley. So if you're going to go to the, bypass the Korean market, then you have to give it your all. It's like Isun Jangun, right? Who burnt all his belongings before he embarked on his, you know, sailing to defend Korea from Japanese invasion. You just have to go give it your all if you're gonna go to the U.S. market again as a placeholder with if that's the market you're going to target, you can't be half-assed about it. So that's the one option, but again, it requires a total abandon and dedication. Now let's go with the second case where you gained a lot of traction in the local market. I mean, and great examples of this are, I mean, it's funny that we have Korean unicorns like Coupang and Toss and Pedare Minjog and so on, and they're still just focused in the Korean market. They're not even that that aggressive in Southeast Asia, even. But anyways, let's assume that you've reached a certain level of maturity in the Korean market before you go to overseas. And again, let's use the US market. Then yes, you need to have solid numbers that you can show to investors and partners and customers that you have reached a certain level of maturity. So every bit of information helps, whether it's customers, whether it's monthly active users, whether it's revenue, whether it's yeah, um, in the case of B2B customers, how many clients you have. And so all these numbers, and especially if you can present it in a growth story format, in a graph format, that gives you credibility with investors, with partners, and with customers. So definitely, if you're going for the second option of attaining local success before you go global, then your numbers and your graphs better look good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think we've probably covered one or two of the questions just below that. One question that we also did ask Jay was the question about international accelerators. I feel that perhaps a lot of Korean startups feel that they're too late stage to go into an international accelerator. And they're very nervous about giving away equity essentially for a program or for 25, 50K. What's your take on kind of using an accelerator as a method of perhaps exploring a new market and also perhaps making initial market entry? Good idea, bad idea? What are the things to think about there?
I think there's, again, on this one, not a right answer. You could go with the accelerator, you could go without it. Let's go with the example of Sandberg and John Kim. He actually went through two global accelerators, well, two US-based accelerators. He went through Techstars first and then Y Combinator too. And I think accelerators are training grounds for helping you, in the context of our conversation, I think they help you acclimate and get used to and become more agile in this US/global context. In a way, Seju from Noom or Chang from Tapas, they dived in. They didn't get any accelerator help, but they were their own accelerators in a way by hitting the ground running and just hustling their way into the US market, right? In the case of John, most of his business experience was in Korea, and then he sold his company to Gree in Japan. So he didn't feel quite comfortable yet with treading into the US/global market, which I think was the reason why he decided to go into the the Techstars accelerator, and then even after subsequently he went to the Y Combinator accelerator. So it depends. If you feel like an accelerator can help you become more acclimated and become more agile in navigating this new cultural and global context, by all means, I think you should apply. And yes, they will take whatever 6-7% equity at a very low valuation, but potentially they could help you then, uh, both in with the networks and the additional skills that you gain, grow the company better and faster, so you can raise at a higher valuation later on.
Mm. I'm not sure if you'd agree. I feel that an accelerator program, they're normally 3 months long as well. So um, it almost seems like a kind of low risk option to really explore a market. I mean, the point of an accelerator is that you experience and learn a year's worth of learnings within 3 months. And, if you went through a US based or Europe, London based accelerator, you spend 3 months. If you realize it's not the right thing, you've kind of only lost 3 months rather than a year or 2 years. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. You've talked quite a bit about cultural assimilation. You've explained actually quite a bit about how Seju, Chang Kim, and also John Kim have kind of got over some of those issues in different ways as well. In terms of kind of cultural issues, what are some of the things that Koreans should be aware of? And this is a question that comes up a lot. I mean, everyone knows broadly that the way that business is done and the way that people are is quite different between Korea and the US. But in terms of kind of specifics or things that you've seen, what are the things that these entrepreneurs should be aware of? And yeah, in terms of cultural faux pas.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna say, I mean, these are some obvious things, and in a way may sound as obvious answers, but um, Nathan, you mentioned how we used to work and organize conferences together, and in one of the ones that we organized, I think it was B Launch 2015 maybe. We had Naval Ravikant from AngelList come,
Yep.
and I remember hanging out with him and his wife down. We had a VIP after party at the Namsan Hyatt, and then we walked down to Itaewon and we were having beers, and then and Naval's wife is Korean, but anyways, we were having this light conversation, and us, the Koreans in the crowd, we were trying to say that all Koreans are all about relationships and friendships, and we are all about building trust, and at the end of the day, business is done through relationships. So that was the gist of the argument, and then Naval stopped me right there, and he said, BS. Almost like his expression was, calling me bull. And he said, I hear that everywhere I go. When I go to Germany, even people in Germany tell me, "Oh, we in Germany, it's all about relationship." Russians say uh, Russians in Russia, initially you can't do anything, but once you penetrate and you become friends, it's all about relationship. China, they say guanxi is all about relationship. So being about relationship is universal, is global. It doesn't matter what country you're in. It's all about relationships, right? So I think people think that the US and other markets are very transactional and so on, but at the end of the day, it's about relationships too, right? Whether it's the investor founder relationship, whether it's the partner to partner relationship, whether it's the customer to vendor relationship, it's about relationships. So I would say do not underestimate that. But in order to build good relationship, yes, I think that's why the cultural and language sensitivity is so important. So I do want to encourage the founders and the CEOs here to really dedicate yourselves to, if you're going after English speaking market, you have to devote yourself to learning and understanding the languages and the cultures that you of the country or region that you want to penetrate. I think you cannot depend solely on interpreters and local general managers and country managers and so on. You as a founder slash CEO, if you want to be a global company, you have to learn and speak the language. You have to learn and understand the culture of the market that you're targeting. So I think that's one. And then assuming that you're going after a certain level of success in the local market, uh, and if not, if you're just going raw into the other market, there's nothing that speaks better than numbers and data to all those three constituents, whether it be partners, whether it be customers or investors. Nothing speaks as loud as data and numbers. You know, you know you can put all these concepts and future planning and so on. You know, when you have numbers, it's like, you know, yeah, you it's a brief, it's a brief, it's an easier sell for everything you do, whether it's a customer relationship, a partner relationship, or an investor relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you brought up the Naval Ravikant anecdote. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good eye opener. I think it leads on to a couple of other things as well. The point that you need to get out there and mix. You need to meet people in person. Now, that's obviously easier said than done in the year of COVID. But what I've been telling companies in this program, the intention was for us to get out there and go to these offline events in the US. Now, that wasn't possible, which has made it more difficult for these companies to build relationships. However, a program like this is still an opportunity to initiate conversations and relationships. You know, it's far better to make initial contact this year and follow up based on an initial discussion, rather than just to wait until COVID passes and then do everything in person. And I think the startups that have been working hard this year on their international growth are going to be the ones that are kind of top of the list, ahead of the game when things return to normal. And the other thing that I picked up from what you just said is about learning the culture, not just the language, but also the culture in the markets where you're expanding to. And again, like you said at the beginning, it's difficult to tackle two different markets at the same time. If those two different markets are different cultures as well, it makes things even more difficult. You know, it's there are differences in the way that things are done in, say, Southeast Asia versus even Northeast Asia, Japan, US versus Europe. And if you're trying to tackle all of those markets simultaneously, you know, even if there could be a product market fit, if you don't understand the culture and the language in those markets, it's going to be really tough. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Nathan, tagging along to the points you've made, I think yeah, cultural sensitivity is very basic. And the other thing I want to say is that, you know, the Korean government and the cities and the regions of Korea putting all these programs to help Korean startups go to global conferences and events and accelerators and academies and so on. there's many VCs who think, oh man, the Korean government is wasting all this money on stupid programs and so on. I'm actually of the camp that these are all beneficial, because as you rightly alluded to, these actually provide exposure and cultural awareness and cultural sensitivities to help entrepreneurs realize that when they get exposed to all these partners, customers, and potential investors, entrepreneurs realize, man, I think I need to you know really study more English, or really understand these markets better. And yeah, I should consider hiring really good people who understand this local market better, rather than me just sending my local pawns and have them figure it out. So all of this exposure helps grow that cultural awareness. So I'm all for it. And net these educational and capacity building programs are very beneficial to startups in general.
Yep, I would agree. Sometimes it, I think sometimes the government focuses on metrics that maybe aren't the most important with these programs, like, how many meetings did you have, or how many people did you take to San Francisco? But they need some metrics, and I think as program operators and also as startups in the programs, you have to work around those things and try and grab as much value as you possibly can from the program. And with these programs, there's usually a degree of flexibility that, even if you have to attend a certain number of meetings, you can kind of tick that box and still extract other tangible values from programs like this. Yeah. Great. Now, John, I'm not sure if you've seen it. There is a note here from Ryan.
Yeah, in the chat window.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
you want me to address some of these questions?
yeah, I think we might as well. I don't think it's taking us off track, and I
Yeah,
think it'd be
yeah,
interesting to see what his perspective is, and maybe explore that a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah. No. So I guess what Ryan is saying, that as a small team, especially using platforms like Amazon, you can go global and tackle many markets, even from Korea. Yes, agreed to some level. And I've seen companies not even using Amazon who have a global customer base and are doing really well. And what I would say is that yes, and that's why I said each each startup situation and customer base and product is different, and therefore the outcome and the possibilities are tailored to that startup. So granted, I would say in the case of having say having the core being Korea and then have global success, it is possible. It's a bit tough with e-commerce because we have many brands and CPG companies in Korea that are trying to go global. And yes, you can use Amazon, but even Amazon requires some local skills to improve and optimize the sort of the sales cycle, the marketing cycle within Amazon, which is why even if you want to tackle different markets using the Amazon platform, you need some local expertise for each of those markets, from our own limited experience. And when it comes to digital distribution, like of digital goods, like the easy and classic example is gaming, right? And yes, you could tackle and target a global audience from Korea, and that's not impossible. Gaming companies like Nexon and so on have been able to do that. But at the end of the day, if you want to penetrate in a deeper manner, then you do need a local team to tackle that sort of the nuances of that local market, which is why even gaming giants like Nexon, NCSoft, and so on, even though they have a HQ in Korea, they'll open a China office, they'll open a Japan office, they'll open a US office, because each market has its own intricacies and different nuances. So I would say yes, but unless you localize your efforts, success in those local markets, the respective local markets, might not be as hugely successful. So that's kind of the argument I'd like to make. And in terms of JV partnerships, maybe when the company is now pretty mature, yes. You know, when you're a Series B and above, and your culture, what your product is, what your strategies has become solidified, doing JV might make sense. But early on, say seed Series A, like many seed Series A startups have not even figured out themselves what their strategy is, what their main product and core kind of culture is. So to do a JV that early on might be risky, because say you do a JV based on current product, current culture, and so on, and then you launch that JV in country X, but then in the meantime, while that JV is running on that original vision and product, HQ company has pivoted already into something else and is working on something different by year 1 or 2 of their initial JV expansion. So it's kind of risky to do JV. And from my own experience, I haven't seen any startup JV actually succeed. But then that's from my own limited experience. You know, I'm sure there could be some other success cases.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'd like to add a couple of points as well. For Ryan, I'd like to have a chat with you maybe at some point in the next couple of days. If you have successfully launched in those markets, that's fantastic, and it would be a great case study. If you're in the process of launching in all of those markets, I am nervous, honestly, because you know, it is possible to launch a product globally on Amazon. It is possible to launch a mobile application globally on the App Store, but launching in that way internationally in many markets doesn't mean that customers in all those markets are going to buy it. And you know, beyond just launching something on a global platform, you have to back it up with marketing and advertising. And if you're talking, you know, here you're talking about the US, Japan, UK, and Korea, that's already 3.5 different languages and 4 very, very different markets. And so, you know, after you've launched on a global platform, there's obviously the complexity, difficulty, language issues of actually making sure that customers in those markets understand what you're doing and know that you exist, and you know, etc. And then obviously if it's a physical product, which in your case I believe it is, you need to think about things like customer service, even just getting your physical product to the customers in those countries. So yeah, I'd like to have a chat with you about that, just to see what the background is. And yeah, I mean, for Tommy, I completely agree with John. What we often say is that, you know, we're a marketing agency, so, you know, we want more clients. However, if companies haven't figured out at least the basics of their marketing themselves, we can't really help them. And there's a risk that if you have a partnership with a marketing agency or a joint venture partner, they'll know more about your business than you do. And that's a risky situation. You'll pay for it in some way down the line. So, Tommy, I think you need to do it yourself first. When you figure it out, by all means, bring some other people on board, I would say.
Thank you, Nathan, for that reinforcement.
So, Yeah, moving on. This is an investor question, really, and specific to COVID. Now, obviously, there's some good news on the horizon with vaccines and all the rest of it. So I guess everyone is holding their breath and hoping that things begin to return to normal. But I think that things will not be back to normal within the next 6 months, possibly even a year, in terms of international travel and all the rest of it. So, as an investor based in LA with a focus on Korea, how has COVID affected your investment processes? How have you been looking for deals? How have you fostered relationships with founders internationally? And based on those experiences, what advice would you give companies in this program that are looking for international investment?
Sure. I'll talk about my Korean experience since I spent I think August through early November in Korea. For us, actually, COVID was the busiest investment time ever. Yeah, and I mean, it was both a combination of us having the cash to invest, but also like an internal philosophy that Ki-hong, my co-founder and business partner, and I decided to pursue, which was when others fear, get greedy, right? So we realized that a lot of investors between March and June were not investing. So we actually went all in into investing, and we made like an average of one investment per week. So within the span of March through June, we invested in like 12 companies. So COVID was like the busiest time, and even while I was in Korea, we made many investments. So we are averaging like one investment per 1 to 2 weeks. So it's been really busy. And in Korea, we saw that investment activity actually started picking up from June, July. So between March and June, we had no competition almost because everybody was not investing. But
Sorry,
starting June,
quick question. So we're most now you have the benefit of an office obviously in LA and Korea. Ki-hong is based in Seoul. So were those investments, were they mostly Korean companies? Were they
Korean
mostly
companies.
they were Korean. Okay. Okay. Sorry
Mm.
for interrupting. Okay.
No, no, no. And maybe 9 to 1. 9 were Korea and maybe 1 US.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So we were almost investing by ourselves March through June, and then the party was over in June when other investors realized, especially in Korea, COVID, life still goes on. So let's just get back to investing, and we saw all the VCs coming back to the investment table from June. So I would say that in general, Korean VC activity is super healthy, and there's no better time to fundraise than today. So
In
that's on the Korea.
Korea
In
from Korean investors. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
In fact, some of our American founders, Korean American founders, have trouble fundraising in the US, so they come to Korea and fundraise more successfully. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the irony. And then in the US, I would say what I just said about the Korean situation, but let's say if the Korean environment is a 10 in terms of the investment activity, I would say that the US is by comparison a 3 or 4. So during COVID, yes, nobody was investing almost, but start from June, July, investment activity in the US also started picking up. So whereas it's not as hyperactive as the Korean market, I would say again, if I said the Korea was a 10, the US would be today at a 3 to 4 in terms of investment activity.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. And obviously, investing locally is easier for different reasons than investing internationally. Yeah. Okay. So there's a follow-on question from Tommy here, which makes sense to answer now, I think. So you're an early stage investor. What is different? I guess the question is, what is different between Korean versus US based seed investors?
Is that an invitation to pitch strong ventures? I mean, I would say that the our main differentiator is that we bring that global perspective, and being a US based investor, we have that perspective into Silicon Valley and the way of US, the way of doing business in the US. So that's one main umbrella benefit. But more than that, the greatest value that we add to our startups is that we help them with the next rounds of investments, and that's where we add the most value, because we lay the ground, and then we can bring also other Korean investors, yes, but in many cases we actually bring our network of US/Silicon Valley investors to invest early into the startups. I mean, classic case, and Nathan, you're very familiar with this, but
Corbett?
we were the first investors in Corbett. Then we brought Tim Draper, Naval Ravikant, David Lee from SV Angel as the next seed round investors. And then came SoftBank, and then we later introduced the company to its eventual acquirer. So that sort of global network of follow-on investors and partners is where we add the most value.
Okay, makes makes a lot of sense, and I think I could be wrong on this, but my feeling, obviously, most people know of Altos Ventures. They seem to be one of the most successful investors in Korea.
Well, people don't realize that they are actually a U.S. investor with offices in Korea, like us.
They're U.S. investor. I guess their first Korea-focused fund was established, whatever it was, 6-7 years ago, something like that. After investing from their U.S. fund for about 10 years before that.
But even that Korea-focused fund is a U.S. fund.
Is U.S. money?
Yeah, no, meaning that the entity is a U.S. fund and has the bulk of its money from US LP investors.
Okay.
So it's not a Korean entity investing into Korean companies. It's a
Okay.
US entity with mostly US money investing into Korean startups.
Through their Seoul branch, right.
And the Seoul branch acts literally as a branch, not as a what should I call it? As an sort of mothership type of office. Yeah.
But again, to reinforce what you've just said, I think one of the reasons that they've been so successful is because they have an international network. And I feel that I feel that it's one of the areas where many of the kind of more traditional Korean VCs honestly fall short a little bit, because they just don't have the access, the depth of access to follow-on funding. They don't have the networks to help with raising a round in the US, or perhaps the corporate networks internationally to help their companies acquire international customers. So yeah, I think that this we've touched on it a few times, that this idea of network is really powerful, especially for companies that want to expand internationally. I mean, if you raised your seed round from Strong Ventures and your Series A from Altos, it's not that you don't need your own international network, but they'll give a lot of it to you on a plate.
Yeah,
I guess.
and actually, Nathan, I mean, we don't go broadcasting that this model, but that's actually our, you just touched upon our playbook, and it also rings back to the comment we said before, that at the end of the day, once you have the metrics and sort of the business results as a base, it's all about relationships, whether it's in Silicon Valley, LA, India, China, Korea, Russia, and so on. Once you have the foundation as in terms of as business success, it's about relationships. And I said it's our playbook because I mean, people don't realize, but we have a very close relationship with the Altos partners and even with SoftBank. And you know, in the case of Altos, the main partners of Altos are our LPs individually, meaning they're investors in our fund. And we've done numerous deals where we were the seed investors, and then we introduced the opportunity to Altos. So classic example is one of them, you know, like these days getting a lot of press is Tangun Market.
Mhm.
So we actually showed Tangun Market to Han at Altos Kim from Series A, and he passed. Can you believe he passed? And he passed like 2-3 times. And then when they were hitting it, like they were like really having amazing success, then Han came back to us and said, "Hey, can you arrange a dinner with the Tangun Market founders?" And and finally, in the last Series B, uh, they came in with you know, Eric came from Goodwater Capital, who, as you know, we're very good friends as well with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, our usual path is we will do the seed round, and then we'll share the deal with the Altos or the SoftBanks of the world. And in some cases, you know, Tim Draper, for example, who's also an investor in our fund, he doesn't like to invest at Series A, Series B. He likes to get in early at seed. So we have
Oh,
to show
really?
him the
Okay.
deal much earlier, right after we invest.
Right.
So, you know, yeah, it's a good thing to have all these good solid relationships, and in many ways, our LPs, who are prolific investors of their own, are our immediate go-to people that we share deals with for follow-on round investments.
It's often said that startups should assess what investors can offer beyond the money, and I think this is a good answer to that question. How to assess an investor, and I really think that, I mean, John's mentioned it for Strong Ventures, and we talked about it for Altos. One of the biggest values they can offer is a network and access to follow-on funding. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great.
Nathan, you want me to
Yeah.
answer this question about the U.S. corporation?
Oh, yes, sure. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that
Yeah.
one.
So, in general, if you are a company that's tackling the Korean market, mainly, we we are right now advising Korean companies to not flip and become U.S. companies in order to get investment from American or global investors. Global investors are now becoming more and more comfortable with investing into Korean companies. And you know, the reason why we recommend Korean companies not to flip to to become US or whatever other jurisdiction companies is because in many cases there are some well, the Korean VC environment has become very heated as well, with the Korean government and corporates and NPS, the National Pension Service, and all these big institutional investors unleashing billions of dollars to invest in startups through VCs, right? So there's a lot of startup investment funding that Korean VCs in Korea have. But a lot of them, because they receive money from the Korean government, are restricting from investing in overseas companies. So by you as a Korean company becoming a US company, you then sometimes like cut yourself off from that pool of investment from Korean funds that can only invest into Korean companies. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if
Yep.
you're a Korean company that's focusing on the Korean market, at least for now and the foreseeable future, we recommend Korean companies to not flip just to get American money. We've had several of our companies who flipped to US companies to get global investment money, and now they have to reflip back, and every flip costs a lot of money, minimum sometimes $100,000. And in terms of, would it be possible to receive the next funding round to the US subsidiary company? Very hard, very hard. Investors don't like to invest into subsidiaries. They want to invest into the mothership, into the HQ. So if you're a Korean HQ company, investors want to invest in the HQ Korean company. If you're a US HQ company, obviously the investors want to invest in the mothership, not into one of the subsidiaries that has even less chance of succeeding.
Dot. This is Eric from Dot. He's I think perhaps what he's got in mind as well beyond investment. I could be wrong here, but they're looking to access U.S. government programs. They're looking to do a lot of B2G work in the next years, and perhaps flipping to the US for investment, like John said, maybe isn't a good idea. But in terms of accessing US government grants for actual projects, that's obviously something you need to look into, and perhaps having some form of official legal US entity may be required to access US government grants and kind of big infrastructure projects. Eric, am I on track with the answer there? Okay.
Yeah, he said, thank you. Yes, again, all of these feedback, insights, and advice are offered in a very generic manner. So it's not specific to any startup. Each startup has its own situations, constraints, and environment that it navigates. But yeah, I would say to every decision, always there's a trade-off. So you got to weigh the cost benefits of each sort of path within the decision tree. But yeah, if you can get U.S. government grants and so on by having a U.S. entity, why not? Why not? You just have to research and dig into whether the U.S. agency that gives you that grant might look into ownership and things like that.
Yeah, and for Dot as well, you might have seen the proposal I sent through last night, but the action item number 1 on the list was to identify which is the right market. And I know that you've already got a UK entity. You're looking at Singapore, the US, and so I think this conversation also backs up the need to identify a market first and focus on that. Yeah. Great. So I think we've got through all of the questions on my list. John, I don't know if there's any that we missed that you'd want to jump back into. Otherwise, if anyone else has questions for John, this is a great opportunity to ask him questions. Again, he's extremely experienced in working specifically with Korean entrepreneurs kind of in Korea and helping them with fundraising, both in Korea and the US. So it's been tricky for us to make connections to VCs outside of our network this year for reasons that we've discussed. And so this is an opportunity to kind of fill in a little bit of that gap, I guess.
Yeah, feel free to ask via the chat window or,
Yep.
via voice if you'd like.
Peter or Dean, from your side as well, anything that you'd like to follow up with John on?
No, I think we covered a lot of topics and was quite good. I don't have anything on my end.
Cool.
Yeah, a lot of what I said is, maybe Jay has said it maybe in a stronger way. What you said the previous session was with Jay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jay and I also go back way long. So Jay I mentioned before that I was my Silicon Valley career started at a company called Dialpad, which was a hybrid Korean tech company becoming a success in Silicon Valley. Just to expand a little bit on that, eventually the company went through ups and downs, but Dialpad did get acquired by Yahoo, became Yahoo Voice, and then the same team from Yahoo then went on to start another startup called Grand Central, again, voice over IP, and then Google acquired Grand Central, became Google Voice. And then the core engineers of Dialpad, some of them, Apple scouted about 6-7 of them, and they are the ones who built FaceTime on the iPhone. So in a way, it's not just a financial success story, but more of a technology success story, in that tech developed by Korean engineers eventually became embedded in some of the top Silicon Valley giants. So that's an inspiration. But going back to the Dialpad days, when I was first hired at Dialpad as a business development manager back in the year 2000, Jay was my direct manager. So
okay.
yeah, and then I remember Jay coaching me on how to do PowerPoints well. I didn't know how to do PowerPoints, but I didn't know how to do PowerPoints anally, OCD way. As Jay came from McKinsey, and all the fonts had to be consistent, all the alignment had to be the same, consistent every page. It was quite grueling military white collar training.
I honestly didn't know about your background in Dialpad, I think. Yeah. That is a big success story.
And in fact, the Dialpad, the co-founders, the CTO and the CEO are, they're serial entrepreneurs. They're still going at it, and they're the founders and the team members behind Skelter Labs, which just got a massive round of funding a few weeks ago.
Yeah, with these sessions, we obviously try to cover the broad bases, as well as giving some specific advice or suggestions. Like John said, this is just advice. These are not rules. These are not formulas for success. Every company is different. And if people are, if people have specific issues that they're facing right now in terms of their international expansion, feel free to ask a question about something very specific that you might feel is only relevant to yourself and your company, because often the answers to these questions or issues are relevant for other people as well. And while people are thinking, John, is there, if there are companies that are interested in having a chat with you, so what's the best thing to do? I'm happy to field inquiries and make introductions. Oh, okay. There you go. If you want to get in touch with John, go for it.
Yeah. As I said earlier, bio and health is not our forte. So not sure if we would be able to help much. We're still going through the learning curve. We are at the beginning of the learning curve, but we're willing to learn and train. So yeah. I left you my email address there. Yeah, so it's been a pleasure being part of this chat. And yeah, congratulations, Nathan and Peter and Dean, for putting this together. And yeah, let me know how I can support all your efforts and initiatives, both for G3 partners and the startups involved in this program.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, John, for your time, for helping with this session, but also for everything you do year after year to help grow the ecosystem in Korea. I guess just to kind of put things into perspective with Strong Ventures specifically, you raised a new fund fairly recently. Is that right? Do you want to give any, or did you spend all?
So as you know, we pretty low key. We don't publicize
Okay.
our activities too much, unless our startups ask us they want to do a press release. But yeah, we just finished raising our third fund, which is of decent size, and we probably will be raising our fourth fund next year. It's like, actually, Jay, we were speaking about, Jay gave me this advice when we were starting. John, be ready to fundraise for the rest of your life when we're starting VC. And I'm like, what? I thought VC is all about investing. And oh man, his advice was so true, so true. So, and in my opinion, having done both fundraising as a founder and fundraising as a VC, VC fundraising is so much harder. So I understand the hustle and the pain and the difficulty and the challenges of fundraising. So yeah, it's a grilling that we all have to go through.
Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks very much, John. We'll let you know of any follow-ups. For everyone else, we will share the video, the recording of this session with you in the next day or so. And like I mentioned at the beginning, do check Dean's email from, I believe it was yesterday, and jump in and sign up for a session with me next week. Yeah, have a good evening, John, and day, rest of the guys.
Thank you. Hey, Nathan, just so I can self-improve my public speaking, do share the link with me as well.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.